It's still spoiler season, which means you know the drill. Today, Riot revealed more cards from the upcoming Guardians of the Ancient expansion set. That is, of course, arriving on May 5th. And today was a bit of a themed reveal. Obviously, these are going to be setting up Malphite, which should be the champion that is revealed tomorrow. But also Heavy Targon to go along with Malphite. And there's a bit of a chip theme as well. I'll cover that at the end of the video and show off why I'm a big fan of today's reveals, because everybody loves chip. But let's start by reviewing the cards. Right out of the gate, we have Spiral Stairs. This is a 3-cost Targon landmark that says countdown 3, create a Seed of Strength in hand. Now, Seed of Strength is a 0-cost slow spell, and it is fleeting, but it says grant an ally +3, +2, and overwhelm. This card is interesting to me because this is another way that you can grant overwhelm in Targon, and as we know, that is a very important thing to do if you're piloting Lee Sin decks, or if you're trying to buff that Sparkle Fly up, whatever the case may be. The interesting piece here is that Spiral Stairs requires you to kind of time when you want this to go off to get the best use out of it. So when you compare it to something like Blade and using that in a Lee Sin deck, the Blade allows you to pick a moment when the opportunity is right, when the opportunity presents itself, to give Lee Sin overwhelm and a little bit of additional health. Spiral Stairs, because the card that it creates, because Seed of Strength is fleeting, means you're going to have to capitalize on that window when it happens. But the good news is, unlike Blade, you can pay up front your mana, and I think that's potentially the appeal. I think that it's going to at least warrant testing to see whether or not it can be a real Blade replacement. I like the consistency of Blade, and I like that if you don't draw your Lee Sin, for example, you can play your first one, and if you Daybreak, then you'll draw another one. So you always have that overwhelm activator, that overwhelm granter in your hand. But Spiral Stairs, when I think about the ability to pay 3 mana on a downturn, let's say, so that I don't have to worry about paying that 3 mana for Blade later, that means I can potentially develop Lee Sin a little bit sooner, still have mana backed up for a Bastion or for a Deny, or even just a Nopify, depending on the state of the game, and then spend that 0 on the Seed. So there is a bit of an appeal there. Now, in a Zoe deck, this is a card that also represents 2 different cards, because Spiral Stairs is going to be one unique trigger, Seed of Strength is going to be another. I'm a little bit less excited there because Spiral Stairs already costs 3, and if you're going with the full countdown of 3, by that point that Zoe is probably either dead or has already leveled up. But it is worth noting that it is 2 cards for Zoe. Again, for me, I think that the real appeal or potential appeal is in something like a Lee Sin deck. Now, that being said, there has been a few other lists where I've been piloting Targon, but with something like Piltover and Zone, for example. This card is actually pretty attractive in a Vi deck, or even with a Victor deck, because those are decks where you're going to have your bots or Victor growing in their attack power throughout the course of a game, as well as Vi, who again counts these multiple cards being played. The Spiral Stairs is 1 card played, obviously the Seed is another, and those are cards that like getting overwhelm. So perhaps this ends up as a 1 or a 2 of in those style of lists, because in those lists you don't traditionally want to run 3 copies of Blade, and so all of the benefit that you get from running something like Blade and a Lee Sin deck, you're not getting in those lists, but Spiral Stairs, I think, stands out there. So I think it's going to warrant some testing in Lee Sin decks, because you are sacrificing flexibility for predictability, but also opening yourself up to potentially protecting your Lee Sin. Again, it's a timing thing, and I do think that it has a home potentially in the like Ruben Zoo Submersible style deck. Submersible is another great card that cares about the multiple cards that you're playing throughout a game, and Spiral Stairs does that. So I think the card is at least interesting enough to see play. It is a countdown 3, so maybe this is what the Preservationist wanted to see. But then even still, I will say before we even go through the rest of the cards, I haven't seen anything that makes me care about those initial advanced cards yet. You could say like, okay, you play Spiral Stairs and then you play Preservationist, but now I've spent, you know, 8 mana and 2 cards to end up with what, a 7/6 Overwhelm. Like, why would I just not play Alpha Wildclaw? So like, I don't know. I'm still waiting for Malphite to be the big activator, or the thing outside of Frozen Thrall that those cards are going to care about, because I didn't see much in this grouping, and that makes me a little bit scared for that archetype. But moving on, another card that was revealed today is Rockfall Path. This is a 2-cost Targon landmark, has a countdown of 2, and it says obliterate the weakest enemy. Now this is interesting because it is straight up the weakest enemy, so this includes champions. This will obliterate an opposing Zoe, or potentially my new love obsession Zillion with his 1 attack power. This is a really powerful effect. This is a common card as well. Now granted, there is a countdown of 2, so your opponent will have time to respond and kind of play around it, but this at least is a very cheap early removal tool to put pressure on your opponent. And just as much as it can be manipulated by your opponent, you, the Targon player, can also manipulate this, because it is a countdown effect. So when it triggers at round start, your opponent will not be able to respond with any sort of buff, for example, to keep something alive. Similarly, though, that means you can't exploit it with just, for example, frostbite effects, because it's going to trigger at the round start. But what you can do, so this actually might be one of the reasons that those advanced cards could matter. What you could theoretically do is utilize some of the minus attack power cards from Shurima. So think like Quicksand, or the new 1-cost one with Predict, or even something like Exhaust. You can utilize those to manipulate the attack power of your opponent's board, and then play one of those advanced cards, advancing your Rockfall Path to trigger on the desired card. Think of it as a similar combo to Frostbite plus Culling Strike that we're used to in, say, Noxus Ash decks. You could see something like that in a Targon Shurima landmark list, but it's a lot of setup. I do just think Rockfall Path is good. One of the things that Targon lacks is decent removal. Most of its removal is very expensive. It's not that it has bad removal, it's just that you have to like invoke a meteor or a comet or something even more expensive. If you're in a Targon heavy deck, that's like the best removal you have. So giving them an early game option is potentially a pretty big deal. But again, it also can be manipulated and played around by your opponent. Something as simple as a Vile Feast could mean that you are hitting basically nothing. Or, you know, if we're talking about really popular meta decks right now, something like Fading Icon dropping a Prey means this is eating a 0/1. Now you're denying them a feeder unit, but who cares? They wasted one of your good removal tools. So I think the card is fair, and I think that it gives Targon a much needed tool, and I'm curious to see how people start potentially trying to exploit it. But I just like it. I think that it's something that Targon needed. Next up, we have Earth Elemental. This is a 4-cost 3/5 with Overwhelm. So even without anything else, a 3/5 with Overwhelm for 4 is not terrible. It's not great if you're really trying to play the Overwhelm as an aggressive keyword strategy. You're going to compare this obviously to something like Ballista, where for 1 mana cheaper, you get a 4/3, which has less health, but obviously more attack power in the Overwhelm keyword. But a 4-cost 3/5 body with a relevant keyword is not terrible. But once you've summoned 4 or more landmarks this game, grant me +3/+0. So once you hit that 4 landmark count, this is suddenly a 4-cost 6/5 Overwhelm. And that is very cost effective. Again, this is a common card, so this could wreak havoc in something like Expeditions, but if we start considering cards like Star-Tipped Peak and Rockfall Path as potentially playable in Targon, even before we pair another region with it, like Shurima or something else, this card could be very threatening. I think this card will likely find a home in some sort of landmark-based archetype, just because a 4-cost 6/5 Overwhelm is very relevant. It's a big body, great keyword, can help you close out games very cost effectively, and you need that low cost because you're likely spending mana on landmarks and or spells to keep you afloat until that point anyway, but I like what I see here. Now, the last card that was revealed is Blue Sentinel, and I just like this from a flavor standpoint as somebody who's played a lot of League. This is the unit that gives you the blue buff. If you're not familiar and you don't play League of Legends, there's a jungle mob. There's this unit that you kill, and whoever kills it, you get one of 2 buffs. There's a red buff and a blue buff, and the blue buff helps you with mana generation and like cooldown reduction. Basically, it helps you cast things more often. Well, Blue Sentinel here is a 2-cost 2/3 with a last breath of summon a Crest of Insight. Now, Crest of Insight is a landmark token. It's a 2-cost token. The 2 cost really only matters if it's bounced back to your hand, because again, this is summoned on the last breath of Blue Sentinel. But Crest of Insight says countdown 1, get an extra mana gem this round. So first off, from a flavor standpoint, I think they nailed it. You have a minion, and if it dies, it helps you to cast more things. Beautiful. It's all I needed from whatever the blue buff was. I love it. But from a usability standpoint, this is really interesting because, one, it creates a landmark, so it's going to help cards like Earth Elemental in terms of triggering your number of landmarks per game, while also letting you develop a defensive body. Yes, it's just a vanilla 2/3, but sometimes a 2/3 on turn 2, if you're in a slower paced deck, is all you need. Like, this is very relevant. And let's be honest, Targon has some historically slow decks that you want to stall for. And then the beauty of this is that it's kind of ramp. Now, it's not permanent ramp. It's not going to be as good as, say, Catalyst is in certain, Targon variants where you're trying to ramp to Aurelion Soul or what have you, but this is situational ramp. The downside here is that you have to capitalize on that extra mana gem the round that you get it, and you don't have as much control over that, because if you really need to block, then you probably really need to block, and so you don't get to time it with whatever the key power play is from your hand. But I guess worst case scenario is if you do get the extra mana gem and you don't use it, it might just roll up into spell mana, because Runeterra is very well designed and has that awesome spell mana mechanic. So it's entirely possible it's not a huge waste to begin with, but I love that this exists in Targon, because this gives them an in-region way to potentially ramp into those late game options. And Aurelion Soul has certainly been there, and a lot of the Invoke cards have been there, but I really hope that Malphite is also some sort of late game literal mountain of a finisher, and I hope that Crest of Insight helps you get there. I like the design of this card, even if this never finds a real competitive home, and I think it's good enough that it could fit into a couple of different decks. But even if it doesn't, I just love the flavor of this. This is exactly what I wanted out of some sort of blue buff card. This also gives me hope for the future that maybe we'll get a red buff, the counterpart. If you're not familiar with that, usually that just helps you deal more damage. Sometimes it gives you a little bit of healing. It would make sense if it ends up being like a Noxus card, just thinking out loud, but who knows? I just want to see a red buff at some point. Glad that we finally got Blue Sentinel giving us the blue buff. I love it. I love it. I love it. Now, the last thing that I want to mention, we've covered the cards, but I said earlier that this is a very chip themed set of reveals. Yes, this is all leading up to Malphite, who I expect will be revealed tomorrow, but I said this was very chip themed. So we're going to go ahead and actually share my desktop a little bit here so that we can go through the full art for some of these cards. So the full art here, we'll pull this up even bigger. You'll notice that even though we have this this big rocky boy over here, we have Chip. So when you go to the full art, Chip says hello. And then here on the stairs, oh look, it's Chip going on a journey. We love Chip. And then again, we go to the full art here, and what do we notice here in the foreground? Why, it's Chip. Everybody loves Chip. And then we go to the blue buff, and look who is here to pick up our blue buff. Why, it's Chip. What a team player, making sure that we get that blue buff. And then even with the actual blue sentinel, you might be looking at this and saying, all right, Charmer, they didn't all have Chip, but this is actually Chip right over here. You can see his cute little eyes, little bit of an underbite, but that's okay, because Chip is, in my opinion, like a rock pug or a rock bulldog, and I will love him with my entire heart. So we love Chip. Yes, we do. We love Chip. How about you? That's it for today's video. I want to know what you think about the new Targon cards. I think that this is actually encouraging because these are, I think, flavorful Targon cards that feel fair, which is not something that I thought I would be saying about Targon. But let me know what you think. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. As always, if you're new, consider subscribing. And until next time, may you walk on warm sands.